Okay, good morning. This is meeting number 479 of the Lake George Park Commission. Do we have a quorum?
Yes,
we do. Very good. Item 1, introductions. We don't need that today. Roll call. Minutes of the previous meeting. Has everybody had an opportunity to see them? Is there any motion or activity on the minutes?
Motion to approve.
Minutes are moved. Seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion's carried. Tony, is it real or reality? I'm embarrassed.
Real.
Real. Thank you. Tony passed last, what day?
Sunday.
Sunday, just a couple days ago. Tony was a longtime member of the Park Commission. I didn't know him very well. Unfortunately, he was leaving as I was coming. And we passed in the dark, apparently. But I know him from history. And if we could, we'd just have a moment of silence in recognition of his service to the people of the state of New York. Thank you. Moving on to fiscal actions, report, and expenditures. Have we had an opportunity to review that? Any comments on it?
Motion.
Motion made, seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion's carried. Thank you. Project review, actions report. Molly? We don't.
Well, Joe has the resolution.
Okay.
Unfortunately, our one project that was scheduled has been postponed.
All right, Joe?
Resolution 2018-41. Whereas the Commission has received and reviewed the Project Review Actions Report prepared by the staff and dated November 6, 2018. Whereas the Project Review Committee recommends acceptance of the Project Review Actions Report, now therefore it be resolved that the Commission directs that the Project Review Actions Report be incorporated in the minutes of the full Commission meeting. So moved.
Second.
Seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion's carried. I forgot to tell you that we were going to incorporate the whole Bob and Ray comedy routine, the slow talking routine. You've heard that. You're as old as I am. And where he was slow talking and then come to ska, neck, to the. Some of you are too young to understand that. Okay. We're down to item 5 already.
Right.
We haven't even had breakfast yet. Highlights: 5 years of Lake George mandatory boat inspection program from Justin Like, our park ranger. And would you like to, are you set up to do that for us?
Yep.
Do you have a dog and pony show for the screen?
Got a presentation for you guys if you want to.
Okay, great.
So you're not blinded.
Oh,
All right. Well, with 2018 wrapping up, we've finished 5 years of boat inspection. So I put together a little presentation here. So we've got some charts and graphs that'll kind of give you an overview.
You may want to grab the mic. It's just easier for the.
How's that?
Just be better for the tape.
Is that better? All right. So, for anyone who doesn't know, we've got a mandatory boat inspection program that requires all boats to be inspected and, if necessary, decontaminated before they launch into Lake George. It's pretty simple. The boat comes into an inspection station, and we give it a good once-over. We're checking to make sure it's clean, drained, and dry. And once it passes the inspection, we attach a vessel inventory control seal, which is those red clips there. We have green clips as well. Those are for the boats that pass the inspection. And if they fail inspection because they're not clean, drained, and dry, we provide a free decontamination. We're using high pressure hot water. And once we've done that, we affix one of these seals, basically attaching the boat to the trailer with a piece of fine wire. And then when the boat gets to the launch of their choice, the launch owner or operator can see that, okay, this boat has a seal on it, so I know that it's been inspected and it's safe to launch into Lake George. And it doesn't have any invasive species on it. And if the boat shows up without one, then he knows he can't launch it. So this table here is, I know there's a lot of information on it, but really the thing that is interesting is the the green columns. That shows number of exit inspections. Maybe it's just interesting to me, but this number increases every year. So every year we have more and more boaters who are getting the exit inspection. And the exit inspection is something we do when the boat comes out of the lake. We give it a once over. We require that they pull their bilge plug and drain any water from the bilge. And we have them lower their outdrive to drain any water that's in their engine. And if we find anything, any plant matter that may be on the trailer or on the boat, we'll remove that. And that way, when the boat comes back to Lake George, it's already sealed. That way, it doesn't have to go through the full inspection, so it saves the boater a lot of time. And the first year, in 2014, a lot of people were like, no, I don't want that. I don't know what that is. I don't need that. And so when they came back the next year, they had to go through the full process all over again. And every year, it looks to me like people are learning that it's worth their 3 minutes maybe or less to get that exit inspection, because it saves them a lot of time when they come back. Because we do get a lot of boats that really only boat on Lake George or they frequent Lake George. So that's interesting. And another thing to note is the total number of boater contacts, so inspections with boats that have never been to Lake George or who show up without a seal, boats that have a seal. We're seeing more and more boats every year. So I don't have the totals listed, but this year we had more boats than any year we've had previously. So this was our busiest year. And this table shows activity by boat inspection station. And notice in 2014 there's no orange column. That's for the $1 Million Beach. That site was not open in 2014. But in 2015 it opened just in time for Memorial Day. And then you'll notice every year, $1 Million Beach, that orange column gets a little bit higher. $1 Million Beach is by far the busiest site we have on Lake George. And they also do the vast majority of the decontaminations there as well. So it's incredibly busy there.
Justin?
Yes.
The new site that's going to be opened, that's on the Northway.
Yep, the Exit 18 site.
Right. Then you'll add that next year, obviously.
Well, we won't, because that's a partner program that's running that. So the Adirondack Watershed Institute, which is at Paul Smith College, they have the contract from the DEC to run that site. So we won't have their information here, but it's actually good that you bring that up, because this year and the last 5 seasons we've had an inspection station at the transfer station just up the hill there in Lake George. And we suspect that with the opening of the Exit 18 site, we won't have any need to run that site, simply because most of the people who stop at the transfer station site are stopping there because they're going to go up Route 9, they're going to a motel or something, maybe a Diamond Point, Bold Landing area. And so they don't want to drive through the $1 Million Beach because it's like the Wild West down there, it's so busy. So we suspect that most of those people, since they're already on the Northway, they'll stop at the Exit 18 site and they won't stop at the transfer station site. So let's see here. So this blue column here, the first column each year, is the transfer station, and you'll notice it gets shorter every year as the $1 Million Beach column gets taller every year, because as more and more people get to know the $1 Million Beach, more and more people are going there. So they're skipping the transfer station site, our site, anyways. So we're planning to close that site for next year.
Okay, so you're not going to even open it. And what about all the equipment that's there?
Well, we'll be able to put that in service. There's extra equipment like hoses and pressure washing attachments. Those will get dispersed to the other sites. So in the event that they have damage or breakages, we can put them into service there.
Interesting. But hopefully we'll be able to get all the data from the Northway site from Pulse.
Yeah, we have a good relationship with a lot of the other programs in the area.
That would be really important to know what's going down.
Absolutely.
Would we be counting the boats that came from there anyway? Because assuming that 5% or 10% of the boats that went through there just...
Right. Yeah, so at the Exit 18 site, they'll be doing inspections and decons as necessary, and they'll be using the same sealing system that we have. So they're different seals. They have different writing on the side. So we'll be able to keep track of the number of boats that come from that site and arrive at our launches. So we'll know how many boats, launched on Lake George that stopped at the Exit 18 site. So we'll be able to keep track of that.
So do you think that the Northway site will eventually lower the amount of the cost that we're going to need to run our site, the other 5, after?
I'm not really sure. It's a good question. I think what we'd like to do is, like this year, we reduced the number of days that the transfer station site was open. We struggled this year with staffing, especially at the $1 Million Beach, and with it being so busy, we actually closed the transfer station site 3 days a week so we could have those inspectors at the $1 Million Beach. And so what we're planning to do next year is, with the closing of the transfer station entirely, those staff will work at the $1 Million Beach, because we were really shorthanded there this year, to the point where it was very stressful for the inspectors. So yes, we're closing the transfer station site, but I don't imagine that closing that site will reduce our staffing costs, because we're going to work them at the $1 Million Beach to help cover the increasing activity there.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. And so we like to figure out where boaters are coming from before they come to Lake George. So this table shows the top 3 previous water bodies. So when a boat shows up at our inspection station, one of the questions that we ask them is, where was this boat in the water last? And you'll see the 3 most common answers are the Hudson River, with 122 invasive species in it, Saratoga Lake with 4 invasive species, and Lake Champlain with 51 now. So these are lakes that are, they have invasive species in them, and these are the 3 most common locations that boats are coming from before they come to Lake George. So it's really important that, we pay attention to where these boats are coming from, and that we know, okay, boat from Hudson River, we know they have, water chestnuts, and those hide on bunks all the time. In fact, I have a picture later in the presentation that I'll show you of a water chestnut stuck on a bunk. It's just interesting to see, how many boats come from these infested waters. This chart here shows the number of decontaminations that we've done each year, with our peak number in 2016. And so this chart shows, what have we found? So what are we finding on boats that come to Lake George with invasive species on them? What are the most common invasive species we find? By far and away, it's Eurasian water milfoil and zebra mussels. And these are 2 things that are found in Saratoga Lake, for example. It seems like every boat that comes from Saratoga Lake has zebra mussels on it. I can tell you stories of guys and the men and women who show up with brand new boats. They're like, oh, it's only 2 weeks old. I just had it in Saratoga Lake. It's brand new. You won't find anything on it. It's been in the water only 2 weeks. And it's got zebra mussels on it already. 2 weeks. That's all it takes. They don't waste any time. And some curly pondweed we found, water chestnuts. Now, this is not the number of water chestnuts or the number of zebra mussels, it's the number of boats that have showed up. So we get boats that show up with dozens of water chestnuts on them, or thousands of zebra mussels all over them. So we spend a significant amount of time decontaminating boats, especially the ones with zebra mussels, because they don't just fall off.
I was going to say, you blow those things off with your pressure washer, or do you have to scrape them off?
It really depends on how bad the boat is. There are some boats that we'll literally scrape them. We have little plastic scrapers. We scrape the zebra mussels off for like an hour, and it's a mess.
And some boats we do actually turn away.
Yes, we
send them to a marina to do a more professional, thorough job than we can.
Yep. If it's a busy day, we don't have the staff to dedicate an hour and a half to washing or decontaminating somebody's boat when they shouldn't have brought it to us in that state in the first place. So we'll say, no, we can't do that today, and we'll recommend that they go take it to a marina and they can have it acid washed or whatever, and then they come back and we're happy to spend a little time looking at it again. And we've done that. We did that a handful of times this year, especially at Norwal. We had a lot of boats show up at Norwal that needed professional cleaning.
Is
You
there
have a
any
question?
reason, why are there no Asian clams shown?
We don't find Asian clams. They don't stick to the boats, and we check. We do check anchor lines and anchors, but they don't. We just haven't found any. They typically, they don't attach to the boats or anything like that.
How did they get in the lake in the first place?
Yeah, through the village.
Probably through
Yeah.
Bilgewater.
Villagers, they,
Villagers.
Right.
Yeah.
maybe
Village.
Yeah,
clams
the
with Bilgewater.
juveniles are so small we can't see them.
I know, that's what I was wondering.
Yeah.
If there's,
Well, that's the main reason why we check for wet equipment. So anchor lines, we ask boaters to to show us where their anchor lines are, and if we find damp lines, we take them out of the compartment, and we have a 5-gallon bucket. We put the rope right in a bucket, and we fill the bucket up with 140-degree water, and we let it sit there. So we're basically cooking anything that may be on that line, and anchors especially, because you find them, you find Asian clams in sandy places where people love to boat and drop anchor and swim, like Sandy Bay, and then they pull their anchor up. If they don't do a good job of rinsing it off, it's possible that they brought something back into the boat with them. So that's why we check.
when you decontaminate the boats, when they come back after they come out of the water,
Yep.
and you drain everything.
Yep, we drain the boats.
Do you find any Asian clams sometimes?
We've not found anything, so we're optimistic that means people are aware and they're doing a good job of cleaning their anchor. Because really, if you are a boat owner, you know how much money boats are, and you like to keep them clean. And who wants to put a nasty, mud-covered anchor back in their nice, pristine, expensive boat? So I think for the most part, people are taking care of that on their own, and so that's less of a concern. We did have a spiny water flea catch this year at the $1 Million Beach. One of our inspectors, Bob Cronin, was going over a gentleman's fishing equipment. He found a clump of spiny water fleas caught on the line. So that was an excellent catch. I've got a picture of that. Yeah, they're so small. I mean, you can't even... I'm impressed because they're very hard to find. So here's a slide that shows some of the things that we see every day. So here are the spiny water flea, and this picture's blown up quite a bit. This is actually the eyelet on the fishing rod, so it kind of gives you an idea of how small these things are. And there's hundreds of them right here. This is a huge clump. You'd never see one. So this is, over here, this is a water chestnut that is stuck to a carpeted bunk. And so a lot of times you literally have to crawl underneath the boat and look up and down at the bunks to see anything. And again, I'm impressed that this one was found because it's way up underneath the boat. So our inspectors are looking. Here's a dustpan full of zebra mussels that came out of this boat here. So we pressure wash this boat and they all fall off and they end up in the mat. And so we clean them up, and this is just some of the stuff that came off of that boat. Here's a rusty crayfish. We found that a couple of years ago. I think that might have been 15 or 16, and that was at the $1 Million Beach. We ask about live bait whenever fishermen come. We say, "Do you have any bait?" And we check. And this gentleman had found these. He collected them himself, and he didn't have a receipt for them because he collected them himself. And when we told him what they were, he felt, "Oh, geez, I didn't know. I wouldn't have brought them if I knew what they were." So what do we do when we find boats that arrive with these things? Do we write tickets or do we give warnings? Typically, we would write a warning for a boat that arrives in Lake George and launches without an inspection. But because of the data that we collect, we're able to take the registration number of the vessel. We can go back and look through our records and say, okay, has this boat been here before? Or is this their first time to Lake George? And we can go all the way back to 2014 and go through and say, okay, we've never seen this boat before. It's probable that they didn't know that this was a requirement, and maybe they launched without an inspection, and they'll get a warning. And it explains the rules and regulations to them. And then hopefully that doesn't happen again. But let's say we see that boat again later in the season, and again, they've launched without an inspection. We can see, okay, we talked to this guy. We know he knows he's not supposed to do that. And at that point, we can issue a ticket. And but I want to give a huge thank you to the Marine Patrol and Lieutenant Johns for helping us out so much, for doing the law enforcement. And this chart here is something that shows the number of citations that have been written. And for the most part, you can see the gold-colored column there. Those are written warnings, and there's far more of those than there are tickets.
Do you know where these guys got in without being inspected?
We do. Often it's one of the DEC locations, so Mossy Point or the $1 Million Beach, where in the off season when the $1 Million Beach is when the gates are left open.
Right. Wonder why those gates are open. Do you know why that is?
There's no gates.
Yeah, there's no gates at the DEC access sites. So we've only had one ticket written for transporting water chestnuts, and only one ticket written for launching with invasive species. So that's really good. We do write a couple of tickets for launch without inspection, but those are boaters that we've determined that should have known better. You know, we can look back at our records and say, okay, this boat has been here 15 times in the last 5 years. They know, and they get a ticket. But fortunately, it's not very many tickets.
Justin,
Yes.
are we getting the support from the courts for these tickets?
Yeah, I would say give that to
Fines
Joe.
usually range between $100 and $250 for those tickets. So I haven't seen any of them dismissed.
So going forward, you know, where do we go from here? We've been doing this for 5 years. What does the future look like? Well, I can tell you after this year, after struggling as much as we did with staffing, we really need to make efforts to remain competitive with our wages. We're hiring boat inspectors at less than what they would make if they went to work for Stewart's and McDonald's and places like that. So when we started this program, the wages that we offered in 2014 were great. You know, we hired a lot of people in 2014 because our wages were good. But as times change, our wages have not really kept up with that. And even other boat inspection programs like the one that the Adirondack Watershed Institute is doing, their inspectors are making dollars more than some of our inspectors are making to do the same job. A few of my inspectors this year mentioned to me that they were, they joked that they were going to go work at the Exit 18 site because they could make more money there. So something that we really have to do in order to remain competitive is increase our wages. So that's something that we're going to be looking to do this coming year, 2019, in an effort to kind of keep up. Another thing that we want to do is make sure that the inspection that you get at the $1 Million Beach is the same inspection you get at Norwalk and Dunham's Bay and Mossy Point and Rogers Rock. Consistency is key. We don't want to hear, well, they didn't make me do that when I went to that site. Why are you making me do it here? Each site is different in its layout and different people have different ways of doing the same thing, but it's important that we kind of give refresher courses so that way, well, let me say this. It's been 5 years since 2014 when we had our original training, and since 2014 we've had a lot of turnover. We have a lot of staff that, college students that were here that have moved on to bigger and better things, and retired folks that are not really retired, they've not come back. And so we have a lot of new employees that didn't make it to the original 2014 training. They get a lot of on-the-job training when we make sure that they know what they're doing, but there's some variation in the ways things are done across the board at each inspection station, and we want to make sure that everything is consistent. We want to make sure that just because you're at a different site, you don't get a different inspection. So we're going to do some training this year. In the spring, we're going to bring our inspectors in and kind of review the procedures and make sure that everyone understands what it is that is expected of them. And again, Catherine, to what you mentioned earlier, talking about the Adirondack Watershed Institute and the Adirondack Park Invasive Plant Program, and also the Candlewood Lake Authority. We have partnerships with these other groups they come to us, to ask questions about, okay, well, what do you do when this happens, and how do you service a Landa and things like that, or they've come to us for training, and we also reach out to them for help. Like I can tell you, there's a woman at the Adirondack Watershed Institute, Sue O'Reilly, and whenever I need laminated copies of samples so we can show boaters when they show up, this is what Eurasian water milfoil looks like, she's my go-to. I say, hey Sue, can you send me a copy of this training aid or that training aid, and I get an email that day. These partnerships are really important, and we're happy to help each other because we all have the same goal, which is to stop the spread of aquatic invasive species. So those partnerships are key, and we're very grateful for the help that we get from our partners. Yes.
I have another question.
Sure.
Okay, so when you put the tag on the trailer.
Yep.
Okay. Do you put that? I just thought, this is what I thought originally, that when the boat came out of the water, it had been washed before it went in.
Yep.
You just automatically put the tag on. But now my question is, you don't put the tag on until you've done that 3-minute post-inspection.
Exactly. Part of the requirement in order to get the red seal that allows them to launch again when they come back without having a full inspection is they have to pull their bilge plug, and they have to lower their outdrive to drain any water that may be in the engine, because obviously we can't make them dry, they just came out of the lake, but we can certainly drain them and clean them. So we're looking the boat over. Okay, did they pull a weed out at the launch? And we'll pull that off. We'll make sure that the boat is clean and drained, and then it leaves Lake George, because they don't always come back to Lake George. They could be going to Brant Lake or Loon Lake or anywhere, and the last thing we want to do is send a boat from Lake George, because we have invasive species in Lake George. We don't want to share that with anybody.
It never dawned on me that boat would come out of the water with something on it. Okay, so what about all these boats that have been, let's say I paid to have my boat taken out of the water, winterized and stored for the season, and they'll put it back in and drive it to my dock or whatever. Do all those people that store those boats, when they launch them in the spring, do they have to go through the boat washing station?
We have what are called hauler agreements, and it's basically a written agreement with many of the boat haulers in the area that says, all right, look, if you take a customer's boat out of the lake and you store it either in their yard or in a boat storage facility or whatever, they can provide us with a list of those customers' vessels, and then we provide that list to our boat inspectors. So let's say I'm a boat hauler and I pulled your boat out of Lake George for you and I stored it in your yard for you because you don't have a truck maybe. I would create a manifest, which is a list of all the customer vessels that I service, and then I provide that to the Lake George Park Commission, and I give that to the boat inspectors. So when I show up at the $1 Million Beach to launch your boat for you in May, they have a list, the inspectors have a list, and they can look, okay, here's the registration number on the boat on the trailer, and here it is on this list. I know that they pulled this boat out in the fall, and they are certifying that they maintained care, custody, and control of that boat, either at your property or their own storage facility, and that they are allowed to launch that without needing a full inspection. Because we recognize that happens a lot in Lake George. Not everybody owns a truck that can haul their big boat, so they outsource that, and we want to make it as simple as possible for the businesses to comply with our regulations. So that's how we do that.
You think we have 100% compliance there?
I'd love to say yes, but probably not. Every year we send out a letter in the fall that says, hey, please provide us with an updated copy of your manifest, because you might sell your boat and so you're not a customer anymore, or you get a new boat, you get a different boat. And so if you show up and I don't have an updated list, then I can't provide an updated list to my inspectors. And in that situation, if a boat hauler shows up at one of our inspection stations and the boat on the trailer is not on the list, it gets inspected because it's not on the list. So they have not demonstrated that they have maintained care, custody, and control. And at that point, it's kind of wasting boat haulers' time. So I think there is an incentive for the boat haulers, because time is money. And if they have to sit there and wait, it's just easier to add it to the spreadsheet and then mail me a copy in the spring, which a lot of haulers do. Some I have to chase a little bit, but it is what it is. So I want to give a huge thanks to the towns, municipalities, and our funding partners, because without them, really, this program wouldn't work. You can't inspect boats without staff, and so their support is crucial. And especially going forward, as we'll likely have to increase the wages of our inspection staff, we will likely need more donations. I want to give a huge thanks to the LGA. This year they helped us a lot with identifying our samples. We make sure that we don't rely on our inspection staff to identify what we find on the boats. We collect it. We have a collection procedure, and then all of our samples are taken to either the LGA or the Darien Freshwater Institute, where someone who really knows what they're doing identifies it. So there's no guesswork involved. So thank you all. And with that, are there any more questions?
What can you tell us about the refurbished rest area south of Exit 18?
Well, they've got we had a meeting with the folks from the Adirondack Watershed Institute, the folks that are going to be running that inspection station, back in early October, I think it was, and we got to kind of get a tour of their pad there. Their pad is similar to the $1 Million Beach site in that they have porous concrete slabs for their decontamination area. They did not have some of their equipment in place yet, but they're going to be working hard to get that in place. They were very hopeful to be ready for Memorial Day weekend this coming year to inspect and decontaminate boats that would be stopping there.
Is that part of our inspection program?
It's not. Nope. The Adirondack Watershed Institute at Paul Smith College is contracted with the DEC to run that.
Jason, didn't I see somewhere this summer where I found another invasive species that was similar to the spiny water flea?
Yes.
But I didn't see a picture of it.
Right.
But it was on a fishing line.
That was, so Lake Champlain they had 50 invasive species at the start of the season, and now they're at 51. They found fishhook water flea this year. So they're trying to figure out where in the lake is it. It's new to them this year, so there's a lot of work to be done to figure out maybe how long it's been there and where exactly it's distributed throughout the lake. So that's what you heard.
So we have not had anything like that.
It's not in Lake George at this time.
It's small, like the spiny.
Yes, exactly. It's very similar to the spiny water flea, but it has a longer tail that kind of hooks, so it looks like a fish hook on the end of it. So hence the name.
Where did that come from, do they think?
Probably the Great Lakes.
I know, but like from what country? Do they have any idea?
I'm not sure off the top of my head.
Canada.
Anyone else?
Fish.
Well, if anyone thinks of any questions or would like a copy of this presentation, my email address is right there. So feel free to write that down, and you can email me with any questions or anything like that, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you.
Thank you. Good job. It's interesting because those of us who are lucky enough to have a boat on the lake, every state of Comerville, don't know what the real program is, right? Interesting. Yeah. I'm not sure, Marshall. Justin, you're a graduate of Paul Smith College, right? Since what year?
Class of 2012.
2012. As a member of the class of 60, I'll send a note up to the Alumni Association to collect some dues from you. Oh, dear. Okay. From the high rate of pay that I'm sure that we are famous for. Okay, thank you very much. We can still meet our goal if you want. Law Enforcement Committee report, Kenneth W. Parker resolution, which I must have here. Fiscal actions. Okay. think I do? Here, law enforcement. All right, we did have a law enforcement committee meeting, and admittedly, there was not an awful lot to discuss. Our Marine Patrol, it's interesting that we still have people, we have one boat in the water, and we still have people who are ready, willing, and able to assist anybody if there's a true need or an emergency, hopefully not. We did go into executive session and discuss some open enforcement cases and a couple of closed enforcement cases. And having said all of that, I'll just go ahead and read this. Whereas the Law Enforcement Committee met November 20th, 2018 to review matters pertaining to the Lake George Park Commission's Marine Patrol and the Commission's law enforcement program, and whereas active law enforcement cases and their status were reviewed in executive session, and whereas the Law Enforcement Committee has reported on the results of that committee meeting at this full Commission meeting, and whereas the Law Enforcement Committee recommends acceptance of this month's law enforcement report, now therefore be it resolved that the Commission accepts the report of the Law Enforcement Committee, and I'll look for a motion on that.
So moved.
Motion, second. All in favor? Aye. Discussion? Carried. Finished. Thank you. And time for public comments. Public comments, I think the Commission should sadly recognize the passing of John Salvador. I know that there's no person who's ever attended a Park Commission meeting that's not familiar with John. And John offered a lot of information and support to the Park Commission, including invasive species.
So Ken, how long have you been growing those?
Just to prove that I'm multi-talented, can do two things at one time: walk and talk. Almost. And chew gum.
Did you get him?
I did. He's back behind me now, propagating the species, probably. But maybe that was John Salvador. God works in strange ways. But John was a longtime friend of mine and of many of ours, and an oftentimes critic, but recognized for his talents. We recognize his passing. Anyone here for public comments? Hearing none, we'll bypass that. And
Move to adjourn. Second.
motion to move for adjournment, seconded. All in favor, and we are adjourned. And the time is 10:40.